project and all the knowledge areas. In initiating the project, the first thing you want to do is to develop a project charter. Once you develop the project charter, when you go into planning, you want to develop a project management plan. And then when you go into executing right now is actually carrying out those work. So if you want to build a house, you start with initiating, you get your contractors, you get your plan, your blueprints, and the right likes. And then your plan involves sitting down and doing your cost plans, your procurement plans, your risk plans, and all that. While executing then means the actual build of the building or whatever it is that you're doing. So integration management states that you need to have knowledge in directing and managing that project work and also managing the project knowledge. When you start any project, there are some learnings that come your way, different ways of doing things. That is under executing, and that's a knowledge that you want to manage. And while you're executing, there's also monitoring and controlling. So how do you monitor the work, the quality that is being delivered? How do you monitor your costs? How do you monitor your schedule? And then how do you incorporate change? What is your change control process in that aspect? And then closing out the project, basically, how do you close your project? Project is done, the building is complete. Okay. In developing your project charter is the authorization for you as a project manager to get resources to actually take control of that task. So there are various things there are key artifacts that are needed, inputs into the project charter. And number one of that is the business case. You need a business case to start a project charter. If you would remember, or rather, the PMBOK 6 stresses a lot on inputs, tools and techniques, and outputs. So for each of these phases, there's an input, there's something going in, there are tools and techniques that are used in that phase, and then there's an output. So right now, when we're talking about the project charter, the input into this domain is your business case, which could be, I don't know, your business plan for the year. There are many ways in which a business case can come in. So as we say, there could be market demand, it could be legal requirements, whatever it is, there's a business case. It comes into as an input, and that informs a business need, which then involves you coming up with a project charter regarding collecting all those resources that are involved in the project. And there's something else as well. This, although not, well, no, let me just say, I want to say that it's not common in many projects. Maybe it's not common on my projects. Is this benefit management plan? Every project has a benefit. There is something you want to derive at the end of the project. So your benefit management plan, it's a document that's going to explain how those benefits are meant to be realized and how they are meant to be developed, or how do you know when your project is ended, and how do you compare those plans together? I hope I'm making sense so far. I like talking. I know it's as if I'm rushing, but if anybody has any question or quick question, please just throw it in so that I know that we're all together. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay. For everything, right? All right.
That's what happened when you have so much knowledge. Okay, I'm with you.
Okay. All right. All right. That's fair enough. Okay. So thank you for that. Starting a project, concluded or finished starting that project. I've mentioned and I've highlighted the main things about the project charter. That's one of the outcomes. And then the next point in PMBOK right now is stakeholder engagement. And this actually is one of my favorite parts of any project, because once a project is developed, you really want to know who are your stakeholders, who are those people that have influence or perceived influence on this project. So you want to identify those stakeholders, you want to plan for those stakeholders' engagement, you want to be able to manage those stakeholders and their expectations, as well as monitor monitor their interest into this project. I know Bayo was mentioning about change management as well. This is where change management really comes into play. How do you manage your stakeholders? And how do you even identify your stakeholders? Stakeholders can come from anywhere. It can come from the main one you want to use is your org chart and how it relates to the project that you're delivering. You want to first of all identify those stakeholders, understand them, analyze them, and then prioritize your stakeholders. Not every stakeholder is on the same level. There are some stakeholder needs that when they speak, you really need to attend to, and there are some that are a drain on your resource that you give them information, but not too much information that will deprive you from your task. And then you want stakeholders to be engaged. You want stakeholders to be actively commenting and providing feedback on every step of the project. When stakeholders are not engaged, there is a problem, because whenever it's quiet and then you deliver, they would ask you, but why didn't you tell us? And it goes beyond sending an email update. You can sit back and say, oh, I've been sending email updates every week. I can guarantee you a lot of people don't read email updates, but you need to find out ways or tools in getting stakeholders engaged in the project. And you want to monitor that engagement to make sure that those stakeholders are constantly engaged, because people can get tired of the project and drop off at the same time. But that's your stakeholder domain. Your stakeholder engagement plan is the major output from this domain as well. It's actually a very small domain anyway, so not too much on that. And then I think one of the biggest domain, or maybe one of the most difficult domain, is your scope, your project scope. So this part involves, you've gotten your business case, you have your project charter. What next, really? How do you break down that scope into, from that high level project, how do you break it down into smaller chunks? And now this is what this knowledge area speaks about. And this works for any project. Now there's an agile consideration here as well, which if time permits, you go through. But in this project, you want to be able to monitor, manage your scope, prevent scope creep, as well as scope creep is unauthorized addition to the project that are necessarily not needed. So you want to be able to manage that. So you want to have a scope management plan, and you also want to have a requirements management plan. So the requirements that were requested for by the business, how are they managed? How are they tracked? And if you have a business analyst on your team, or you have some business analysis experience, this is where you also come into play, because at this point, this is where you gather those requirements that are needed. So you collect requirements from the product. What kind of product is it? From the business, what kind of, those are high level requirements. Then from the stakeholders are the individuals that need specific features on their project, on their products, or on the project that is being delivered. And then you tie all this into something called a requirements traceability matrix. That just means that those requirements that were developed or that were gathered for that project, how does it tie into the overall objective or to the overall goal of the project? So that really is your requirements, requirements traceability matrix. And then I think that generally is the gist of scope management. But before I hand it off, I would just like to talk on the agile consideration for scope management. So generally, with traditional projects, what they say is that requirements will be collected at the beginning of the project. And then if there is any change, that needs to go through a change control board. But for agile or adaptive projects, it says that requirements can be collected any time of a project, but they are prioritized. So basically, in the middle of a project, your MD or a sponsor or a stakeholder can request a new feature. That new feature will then go into something called the product backlog, which at the end of that sprint, if it's a high priority, it gets added into the project immediately. So those are some of the considerations between requirements and scope, scope management anyway, between traditional and then agile. And basically, I think at a high level, that's what scope talks about. So I don't know if I did well on time there, Abby, and I'll pass it off. Yeah. Eh, Stop sharing.
Okay, I guess I'm up here. So we are going to cover three aspects, starting by quality management. So I will probably share just yes, I'm able to share whatever I want. So I hope you can all see my screen. So quality management. So I like the way it's presented in the 6th edition, but also the way it's presented in the 7th edition. So, and they kind of complement each other. So, what is quality? Quality is the perception of usefulness of of a product or a service, and it's usually defined by the client, by the customer. Could be internal customer or external customers. So, and when you think of that first definition of quality, the PMBOK 7 will focus a lot on that. So they will look at what is the dimension of performance. Is it in conformity with what it was intended to be? Is it reliable? So if you produce it over time, do you have the same result? Is it resilient? If you have some changes that happen over time during the project phase, are you able to recover and still maintain the level of quality? Do you have a satisfaction delivered to the customer? Is it uniform, and do you have efficiency and sustainability built in the process and the deliverable? So, and the PMBOK 7 will define quality as a process, focusing on both the processes and the deliverables. Whereas when you go back to the 6th edition, and that is what Kemote was saying earlier, it's a lot on the ITTO, which is the input, tool and techniques, and output. And what is very important here is to see how the quality management is organized, and pretty much all the knowledge areas for the same path. You plan, you manage, or execute, and you control. So that would be the same case with quality management. So when we go through the bootcamp, look at what goes into planning the quality management, what goes into actually executing your plan, and how do you control the quality. For you to have an efficient, effective quality management plan, it needs to be aligned with some key deliverables that you had before. Okay, we did talk about initiation, about planning. So your project charter is the first document that is signed off by the senior executive team saying, okay, we are going with this project. Your quality management plan needs to be aligned also with any other project management document that you have released. It could be your project scope, could be your budget, could be your sorry, Abby, did you say something? Oh, okay, sounds good. So those are the input that you use to build your quality management plan. Now, you'll need to define some tools and techniques. What does that mean? How do I collect the data to evaluate or to assess my quality level? What are the do I need any ERP? Do I need any software? Do I only use Excel? How often am I going to collect those data? What are my decision criteria to say I am on target? My production quality is way off my range of acceptance. How do we run the testing? All those questions need to be taught at this stage of planning. Why? Because this is where you're going to think about your training material, your standard operating procedures, the area that you need to prepare for those people to work there. And the output, once you have everything done at this stage of planning your quality management, you have a quality management plan. That is the first output of that stage. And you have the matrix, the quality matrix. What am I looking at to this to say, yes, I have achieved my quality level, and your any other document that you need to update. Now, once you have a very interesting plan, very strong, very well thought, now you go into executing it. So throughout the project, you will roll out all those tools and techniques you said you were going to use. And that is why when you look at the second column of this graph, the pretty much the exact same tools are transferred over from the planning to the execution level. Now we add there problem solving, and we add there some quality improvement methods. Why? What we know about forecast is that forecast by its essence is always inaccurate. You always have a difference between your forecast and your actual, which means what you have planned will not go as perfect as you have planned. The question is, how far would you be? And you need to be able to correct those issues that happen and that justify the variance, and apply improvement methods to still meet your target. That ties back to what we mentioned in the PMBOK 7, which is adaptability, which is resiliency and sustainability. So that is what we are looking at when we think about quality. Now, the last thing that you need to know is how do we control the quality? So this will apply to any project. It could be in agile methodology or in predictive. Now, the main difference when you look at the quality control between those two main stream of processes will be when you do the quality. Usually for the predictive, you will do the quality control at the end of the product, when you go and do the final receipt. You may have intermittent quality check, but for agile, anytime you release a feature at any iteration, you need to have a validation by the customer. And it's only when it's proved and validated that you move on to the next one. So that is quality management. So we go a bit deeper into the concept. One thing I wanted to highlight when it comes to PMBOK 7, there's more examples, there's more applicability in the way they have wrote the PMBOK. So when you do the boot camp, you receive a lot of contents, but for you to be effective when you go and take your exam, we highly recommend give yourself 30 to 60 days and read through the actual PMBOKs. If you have time, read both editions. But once you do that, you have in the U-Certify LMS platform a lot of exercise with answers. So you go and you do the Q&A, multiple choice questions, scenario exercise, and that will help you a lot to understand what might happen in the real world, because that is how the questions come in your actual exam. So the end goal of quality management is to ensure that we deliver on the expectations. Now, we'll talk about what are the project baselines. You have the scope, you have the time, and you have the cost. That makes your triangle. That is your baseline. And usually in the middle, you have the quality. Whatever you do or whatever the project forces you to do in changing the product baselines, you need to ensure that you're not sacrificing quality. What do I mean? If the price of input could be concrete, could be cement, could be labor. If it's high up and your product cost increases, and you have in that case maybe to extend the length of the project, make sure that if those two baseline moves, your quality isn't affected. So anything you do in the main baseline of your project, keep quality as the core, because that is what your customer will judge you firstly on, and then they will look at the cost and they might look at the schedule after. I don't know if there's any question. Okay, I'm going just high level on what. So, sounds good. Sounds good to me. So that is quality management. Now I'll quickly jump into procurement. So I'm pretty sure a lot of people on the call here are very knowledgeable about procurement. So essentially, you cannot run a project 100% with all in-house resources. It might be if you're working on a construction project, you will go rent a crane. You hire a contractor to come and do your foundation. You hire framers to come and do the framing. And you are just the builder. What the builder do, mostly here in Canada, the subcontract. So how do you determine when you will have the framer coming to do the framing? And how do you determine when the job is done? So you will need to do a procurement plan, which lists all the activities that need to be outsourced. Now, there's a making house versus outsource decision that you have to make. Now, depending on the process, if it's a big project and you are calling someone from outside, are you in a public or a private sector? The public will take more time to do some bidding because of international roles. If it's a private, it will be shorter. But at the end of the day, you need to define what is your bidding process. How long would that take? You need to forecast that, put that one into your schedule. So we will talk about planning your procurement. I would quickly procurement management. I'll bring up what we have on procurement here on PMBOK 6. So why it's bringing that up? Interestingly enough, okay, I know why. I'm missing an A here. Beautiful. A. So the first thing is to determine what am I procuring? Is it people? Is it materials? Is it anything else? Once you define what you're procuring, you need to know when you need to bring them in. Once you know when you're bringing them in, what are the tools and techniques that you need? Are you doing some biddings? Are you just is it an MRO that you are being on board? Once you bring them, you have the part of project, I'll say contract management. If I'm bringing an external resources, I'm bringing them to do a specific job. So you need to think of how is that job going to be managed. You need to think of the dependency between that outsourced job and the previous jobs. If you have a delay on the foundation contractor, how would that affect your ability to bring the next contractor? Do you have some rules built in your sourcing process that will help you to maintain that person? If it's in summer, the framers are very hot cake. So, because they are needed everywhere. If you have a delay, you might need to pay an extra to keep them on the job if you are running late. If you don't think that at your planning stage, what will happen, you might have a budget increase that will push a bit out what you end up when you do your product cost evaluation. So, and procurement management, that's that you plan, you look at what you need to purchase, how am I purchasing it, and how you integrate that with all your other aspects. So essentially, that is what we cover. We go into the input output. Some of the input will be your project management plan, will be your resource management plan that Bio will cover later today. You use your material or material planning when you need to bring them in, and you use any other company's documentation. What I mean, if your company has a kind of like a threshold for expenses for procurement, you need to consider that when doing your procurement plan. If you have some signature or DAG, delegation of authority, restriction, which means you as a project manager, you might have a delegation of authority of $1 million, but what you have on your plan is over a $2 million. You need to know in your communication plan how to work with CFO or anybody at the higher level who can sign off on that, and it doesn't impact your timeline. So we'll look at some real life scenarios, and the end goal is to deliver the product on time, with quality, and have the satisfaction of the customer. So just high level, that is what that would be. I don't know if Bayo, you want to go over before I take the risk. I think
Yes.
this.
Yeah, sure. Right. So since you just we can just quickly can everybody hear me? All right. So we're going to be going on to managing resources. Right. Let me share my screen. Okay, Gauthier, you need to stop sharing. It's not like a Teams where you can snatch other people's screen. Okay, so let's see which. Yep. No, let me start with this one. Okay, can you see my screen? Hello?
Yep.
Okay, all right. So I just wanted to highlight two things before I quickly go into managing resources. The first one is this guide here that talks about the difference between the 6th edition and the 7th edition and how they interface. You know, especially for like what Kimothy has said, the exam, because we are the interface between the 6th and 7th edition, the exam covers both editions in separate, in different ways. So you still have your, sorry, give me 1 minute, please. I need to move my screen. I'm using two screens, so it's making it, let me stop sharing. so that I can move my documents. So I'm facing the screen that I'm sharing. Sorry. Okay, I think I can share again now. Should be better. Right. So yeah, so I'm looking at my camera. I'm not looking sideways. Yes. So what this just shows is in the 6th edition, it was pretty much the exam outline was divided into like 2 main guides. There's the body of knowledge, and then there's the standard, and the standard has all the initial initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, control, and closing. But in the 7th edition, they kind of flipped it a bit. So basically, simulate what goes on, because what happened to a lot of people was that you assume that the project, you must do initiation, then do planning, then do execution, and then do monitoring and control in that order. But the truth is, if you've ever worked in a real life project, it doesn't really work like that. While you're initiating, you have started planning, while you're executing, you're planning, especially when you go to agile, so that's why they kind of made it this structure. I just wanted to highlight that to everybody. And then the other thing that I wanted to highlight is there was something that in the first slide that Mr. Abiodun showed. Okay, so let's see. So this is resources. In the first slide that Mr. Abiodun showed, he spoke about there was something that was on that slide that I wanted to just highlight. Now, when you are going through your exams, I know we'll also talk about this later, but I just wanted to highlight it quickly. Answering questions should be based on the PMI framework, not necessarily on practice in industry. I know for those who have done the exam will know that, especially if you've ever worked as a PM before, what you do in practice sometimes gets in the way of what the standard asks you to do. And then you are thinking of a question and you're thinking, what did you used to do? No, the standard doesn't want you to care of that. If the standard, all the standard wants you to do is, this is what we say and this is what the standard is. So quickly, I'm going to go into managing resources and team. And this lesson really covers, again, this is going to be high level. So I'm going to, we're looking at, the lesson covers topics, planning for and acquiring project resources. It talks about high performing teams. How do you get your team? And then project leadership, and then special project solution. So the first thing, like Gote said, when you have done your project plan, and then you have your schedule, then the next thing you think about is, who are the people that we need to execute the work? So we can do the plan, we can have your charter, we know this is the end goal, we know where we want to get to. Because you also need to do project planning for resources in order to be able to do your cost, in order to do cost management, in order to do your risk. If you're a construction site, the risk, if there are certain stages of construction that have so many people, when you are doing your foundation, all you have are the concrete guys and nobody else, and they are working on the floor. And so when you are doing your risk management, the risk involved when the concrete guys are working is different from when the framers are working. Because and then when the framers are working, the framers there are probably 10 to 15 framers on a site per time. And then like Gote just mentioned, framers are highly in demand. So you want to be sure that if you need to deliver a project at a particular time frame, you want to be sure that all your project resources, especially human resources, are available for the project as at when your time frame falls due. But one of the biggest challenges that we are facing now, especially with agile projects, is because in agile projects, scope is done iteratively. So if by the time if a scope changes or if a new feature is added to the project, you want to be careful. So if not, as at the time of when you get to the time of the sprint, you want to be sure that the resource that is available to make that feature is available, you know, which is key. Because one of the I work in an organization where we use hybrid approach, you know. So you want to be sure that a developer is available for a particular feature as at when you need it on the project team. So all of that is where planning for resources is important. And then also you want to make sure that your team is high performing. And then that now goes into what are the characteristics of high performing teams. And then you now go into all the different parts of teamwork. Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay, sorry about yeah, I'm not okay. Let's see, let's stop that and share again. I'm not used to I'm not a Zoom sharing person. Okay. Okay, so right. Okay, now I'm sharing this screen. I would learn.
Yeah, we can see your screen.
Okay, I would learn how to use Zoom properly. I'm more used to sharing on Teams. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so the first one I've talked about planning for and acquiring project resources and why it is important. And then we now talk about when you get your team, how do you ensure that your team is high performing? Then how do you get to project leadership? You know, for project leadership, you now need to review the key components and the skill sets, because it's one thing to get resources for your project. It's another thing to be sure that the team is led properly. And then the last part of this learning objectives is special project situations. You know, how, what do you do in a hybrid team? What do you do with projects that, as Okemute will probably know, when you're working on teams that projects are in different parts of the world. You know, I'm currently working on a project where all the ops developers are in China. So we, the implementers, are in Canada, they are in China, and then time zones are totally different, and that skews your projects or your team, resource planning, because it means that if we have to do a Zoom, if we have to do a Teams meeting, or even a Scrum, Scrums are 7 p.m., 8 p.m. Canada time. So then it now goes into cost. If I'm going to attend that Scrum meeting, who's going to pay for that time? And so all of that now needs to be built into your project cost and your project risk. So let's just quickly go down. Right, let's see. So here, the project 6th edition talks of you plan your resource, you estimate the activity, you acquire the resource, you develop the team, you manage the team, and you control the resource. That's what the 6th edition outlines. So like I've said, you have to plan the resource based on the project. You have to estimate how long a resource will stay on a particular project. For agile projects, it's easy. Depends on how your sprint is. If your sprint is a 2-week sprint, if your sprint is a 3-week sprint. So if you are assigning a task to a particular developer, you know that for the next 3 weeks, it has to be available on your project. If the resource is not going to be available for the whole of the 3 weeks, then you have to make sure that the task itself is what do you call that thing again? The task is a task that can be completed within the available time that the resource has. You know, so all of that must go into your planning and how you estimate your activities. Then you now have to acquire the resource. Gutia has mentioned it. If with that now, acquire resource now goes into procurement, because you now have to look at, do I have internal resource? If I have 7 tasks, 7 activities, do we have all the resources internally to be able to do it? If not, do we need to look for third-party resources to do it? and then you now have to, so who is the vendor? Is the vendor registered? So it's not the day you need it's not the week you need the activity to start that you now start talking about, okay, I need to acquire the resource, because again, resources are scarce. There are people have, so you want to make sure that you already have a binding agreement with the vendor before you get to the date where you need it. Then you now have to, even after you acquire resource, then you now have to developing team is a whole different activity. That was no, so I've just looked at PMBOK 6, then in PMBOK 7, it takes it in a different form, but they're all aligned, and it talks about shared ownership. All project team members must be clear on the project vision and objective. And then you see, it still talks about making sure that you have high performing teams, and then now talks of project leadership. And quickly, okay, I'm going to move on to communications, but I'm going to probably end. So these are the domains. Now, one thing that we must highlight for those who are just starting is that in PMBOK 7, domains are split into 3. For every major highlight, domains are people, process, and business environment. And as you can see, for managing resources, you have the different tasks. So most of it, of course, is people domain. Yep. Okay. All right. So it's just to show that the different domains. And let me see, what else do I want to highlight here? I've talked about the key processes, planning the resource, estimating the activities, and all the different artifacts. So one thing I would highlight before I go, this one, no, I want to go down to, sorry, just give me 1 minute. Yeah, so a major artifact for human resource is this RACI matrix. People need to be aware of what the RACI matrix are: responsibility, accountability. Oh, sorry, let's see. Yes, responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. During stakeholder management, okay, we talked about it. A RACI matrix helps you know how to manage your stakeholders. Which stakeholder is responsible for what stakeholder is accountable, and what stakeholder should be consulted. The final thing for me that I want to talk about, I saw it here. Now just give me 1 minute to go to it. Is the team. Yes, when you're talking of, yes, this particular slide is a very interesting slide, and everybody it's called the Tuckman stages of team formation. No matter what, every exam it has a question around it, and it basically talks about how teams are formed and what happens when teams are formed. So when you bring people together, what happens to them? They storm, they norm, they put adjoining here. It used to be storm, norm, form, and perform, but it's now storm, norm, adjourn, form, and perform. So these are the 5 stages of team development, and every team goes through it. As you go into the cohort, we'll talk more on it, but it's one thing everybody needs to know, because no matter the exam, it always comes out as one of the questions around team formation. Okay, so I think that should be all. Can I just quickly go into projects? Sorry. Yep. Communications. Oh, time, right. Okay. Okay.
So,
Thank you.
do you want to skip risk management?
Okay.
Okay.
All
Sounds
right.
good.
Fine. Yes.
Okay. So I guess I would share again. Okay. Can you see my screen? Yes, I can see it. Okay. So I think we saw this slide from Bio just now, and we are touched on it throughout this presentation. So the difference between the 6th edition and the 7th edition. Now, if we see right, I'm trying to look for, okay, looking for highlighter. Okay, so you can see this is the sixth guide, and it talks about the body of knowledge. This is basically the knowledge areas we're speaking about: the integration, scope, schedules, cost, quality, resources, communication, risk, procurement, and stakeholders. So in PMBOK 6, everything you need to know on a project is grouped into these knowledge areas, and the processes are initiating, planning, executing, monitoring and controlling, and then closing. But then in the transition to the PMBOK 7th edition, this knowledge area is translated under the project performance domains here. Basically, it includes stakeholders, team, development approach and lifecycle, planning, project work, delivery, measurement, and uncertainty. The differences, I'll just call out the differences. The general approach to PMBOK 6 is that it was prescriptive, meaning it's telling you what to do. There's the emphasis on this is how you do it, not really why or what you're even doing. Remember, we said it involves a lot of ITTOs, your input, tools and techniques, output. So basically, people were going into this into projects with this framework under okay, I need an input, I'm going to use this tool, I'm going to use this technique, and I'm going to get this output. And it then highlights the and it was generally geared towards the traditional approach, meaning phases, waterfall. When one phase is completed, there's a sign off, and then there's a move to another phase. But right now, this new approach, it's more of a guide. So there are more of principles that guide your mindset. So, and the behaviors that reflect the general knowledge, basically, for project delivery, and includes all projects. So it's moving from this is what you do towards these are the principles that govern the project work. And then there were specific processes, as I mentioned, and it was very much process focused and compliance and regulation driven. While the PMBOK 7, this 7th edition, speaks a lot more of the interdependencies between all the areas and all the performance domains, basically, as well as an overview. It also includes commonly used tools and techniques, though. So it's not as if it's totally discarding the various tools that are being used. Those tools are developed, as I said, it's more of the principles that will guide your mindset. And it's also heavily focused on the outcome. So in not just the deliverable, but what is the outcome? Now, if you go through PMBOK 7, at the end of all of these stakeholders, performance domain, team performance domain, everything, it explains what should be the outcome of you applying this knowledge. So I know, I remember for one, like the team is that when you go through this domain or when you go through a project, an outcome from imbibing all these knowledge areas or imbibing all the knowledge on the project is that you have a team that is well focused and takes ownership of the project. So that's an outcome. So it focuses a lot on those type of outcomes drawn up from the guiding principles. And the project environment is still the same. So basically internal projects, external projects works. And as I mentioned, PMBOK highlights most projects. It's not specific to the agile, or it doesn't speak a lot to agile, even though it speaks to hybrid and then it touches on some agile principles, but it doesn't speak to that. While PMBOK 7th edition is basically every project. So if you read PMBOK 7, it speaks to every project. So with every form of project you are working on, this performance domain will always come into play. And then there's something shocking as well in this, is that this PMBOK 6 is for project managers, primarily for project managers. But PMBOK 7 is actually for everyone on the project team. So that includes team members, various team roles. Also, it talks project leads, product owners, and even the project sponsor as well can read this 7th edition and get an understanding of what it is. So it's very broad and value driven. And I'll go towards that a bit. And what else? Okay, I think tailoring is one. So in PMBOK 6, there is tailoring is like a, will I call it an addendum or just like a short topic or even a paragraph in this edition. But here in the 7th edition, it has its own domain. So it talks a lot of tailoring. That means it moves into a focus in every project is unique, and so is the development approach to every project. So it explains, okay, why do you tailor? What are the steps involved in tailoring? What do you look into while you tailor? So that's just some of the distinctions between these two books. Then another key one here is this first one, the standard for project management. This is where it talks on principles. Now, if you remember Agile Manifesto, I know Agile Manifesto has 12 principles. So for anybody who has studied Scrum, or rather this Scrum, whichever one anyway, started in that value driven. So the way PMBOK looked at it is that there's no point having a body of knowledge that is okay for one kind of project and then one body of knowledge for another kind of project. The idea behind this PMBOK is to harmonize all those projects together, that you can read this book, you can get an understanding, and you can function in any of those projects that you get thrown into. And that's why they came up with these things called the project management principles. So it's kind of like the Agile Manifesto that has their own 12 guiding principles. So PMI now has its own project management principles, and I believe there are 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Okay, so there are 12, the same 12. So it's really just about the principles that are involved in projects. So basically, it talks about stewardship, owning the project, talks about teamwork, talks about stakeholders, talks about the value that is being delivered, talks about system thinking. That basically means you see the project and all the interrelated dependencies as a whole, not just one. Speaks a lot about leadership. Tailoring is key here. It talks about quality, complexities, what those mean. Talks about risk, adaptability, and resiliency. Basically, adaptability is how well you are flexible, while resilience is how well you recover from any change or any impact. And then what are the principles of change? So in a nutshell, the major difference between these books, and actually, again, the size is also another difference. The PMBOK 7 edition is about 700 pages big. I don't know, it's a difficult read. I don't know if anybody has read it to the end, but it's difficult to read. While the PMBOK is under 200 pages. Oh no, under 300 pages, about 200 and something pages. It's actually very easy to read. You read it and you know what projects are. Again, remember, it speaks a lot about values and principles. So in my own approach or my advice would be definitely to combine both while studying for the PM exam, because not only will questions be drawn from this, but this having an understanding of what these knowledge areas are translates into being able to better manage this transition in terms of project performance domains. There are some few calculations in this 7th edition, but it's not as heavily focused as the ones you have in the 6th edition that talk about estimation to completion, estimate at completion, all those calculations. But I still think those calculations come out in the PMP exam. So I guess that's it. I don't know if I've touched on everything. Now, models, methods, and artifacts are now like, remember those outputs from the various domains in the 6th edition. So things like your project management plan, your project charter, those are artifacts. Right now, it has its own group. So every artifact that can be built or that can be developed on the project is explained here and at a very high level, and is just touched on there. So for me, I enjoy reading the 7th edition. It was an easier read. It more or less guides projects. It incorporates a lot about agile. As I said, hybrid approach is the way the world is going right now, and you need to be able to know what agile is to even be able to imbibe it into a hybrid approach. So that's key. And then this emphasis on tailoring, meaning that every development approach is different, and you should tailor for the specific project, tailor for the specific organization, and also tailor for the specific environment. So in general, those are just the two differences. I'm not going to go into all the performance domains. So I'll pass it on to Abby. Mm. It's coming up. Yep. Yep. Okay.
Okay. Okay. So I hope you can see my screen, right? Okay, it's going to be a little bit odd here. You can see my screen, is that correct? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So of course, some changes also happened with the exam, the way the exam is made up, in terms of the question sets and every other thing in between, and that's what we're trying to show here. So the PMP exam is a computer-based exam with 180 random questions to answer in 3 hours and 50 minutes. So there are some of the questions that are actually not graded. So there are 5 experimental questions, not really math, but they won't tell you which one it is, right? So basically, it's 175 questions that they're actually going to score. So, but the other thing that you need to notice, which we'll look at in the ECO, which is the exam content outline, is like a makeup of the question sets that you're going to be answering. 42% of that is going to be, based on the people domain. So we're going to look at the items under the people domain soon. Then process will be 50%. So, and this is where Gautier, what you were saying comes in. Fine. When you are preparing for your PMP exam, you should expect this type of distribution in the type of questions that you're going to be asked. You're going to be asked, and simply what that means is that the PM boxes is still very relevant, right? Because you see, the PM boxes is focused on process, like I said earlier. So it even has what they call process groups, right? I think you have about 5 process groups, and under each process groups, you will have all this breakdown of the things we went over earlier. All the planning, the execution, and the control stuff. So indeed, the PMBOK 5, PMBOK 6 is still very, very relevant for anyone preparing, because 50% of the question, that is half of the question they're going to be asking you, is coming from these process-based scenarios. So for this reason, PM boxes is still very relevant. And then the people aspect here is about 42%. So questions that will be related to people. So a lot of the things that Bayo was reviewing earlier. So resource management, communication, and stakeholder engagement, all of these are people-oriented questions, and a large chunk of it is going to be coming through in the exams. So here is the tricky part when it comes to, okay, these question sets are going to be coming in the exams. The tricky part here is there are a lot of questions that will fall under all the different domains that Okemuche reviewed earlier, but there's no way to really say, oh, this will be people, this will be process, like something of that nature. You can't really pick them apart to say this is a people question, this is and I think this is really still the confusion around PMP, people who are taking PMP exam. You've broken this thing down into 50% process and 42% people, and then 8% business environment. But how do we know which one is people, which one is process, and which one is business environment question? It's really a very tricky, scenario. So, well, they provided the document to help us, identify, those type of questions that might be coming and where they may be coming from under these 3 categories of the people, process, and also business environment. And that's what they call the exam content outline. So definitely, if you are preparing for the PMP exam, you have to look at the exam content outline to know, okay, if you are really, um, taking care or reading through those type of topics that will address people. So you can see the breakdown here: lead a team, people, empower team members and stakeholders, ensure team members, stakeholders are adequately trained, address and remove impediments, obstacles, and blockers for the team, promoting performance through the application of EI, emotional intelligence, execute project. So that is people. So all of that is people. So task 2, task 4, task 5, task 6, task 14, those are categorized as people. And you will see, like I mentioned earlier, this falls under the resource management, communication, stakeholder engagement. And then you have the process. So this is the one where you'll find a lot of this under the PMBOK 6. And so some of the things that you guys have reviewed already, talking about the project methodology, or the project development cycle, execute project with the urgency required to deliver business value, establish project governance structure, manage project issues, ensure knowledge transfer for project continuity. So all of these are processes. And then the business environment, you have plan and project compliance, manage project compliance, evaluate and deliver project benefits and value, and support organizational change. So this is the exam content outline, which will be the basis for the questions that will be coming through. So the one thing that I will quickly point out is, you will imagine that it is a little bit difficult or tricky to say, oh, have I covered topics under this particular item that they listed here, the tasks they listed here. This is one of the value we get from the learning management system that we use in the cohort, because it actually has a plan that shows and tracks which topic you have been able to cover when you are preparing. So it actually has a page where it will show you clearly what you have been able to cover under these different exam content outline. So that way you have an idea of what needs to still be covered. In fact, it will grade all the quizzes, all the questions in the mock exams under this particular structure. So you know where you have weaknesses and you know where you have to improve towards passing your exam. Generally, we say when you are preparing for the exam, ensure that you pass above 80% in the mock exam before you actually attempt the question itself. I mean, the exam itself. But one thing I always like to say here is this: do not wait until you have covered the learning materials before you book your exam. The truth is that exam will never happen. And I've seen it over and over and over. If you are waiting for the perfect time that I've covered all the materials before I register for my exam, the exam would never happen. And it's purely a plan to waste your resources, both in time and money. So it will happen that you bought the resource, you enrolled for the training and all of that. And because you did not pay for the exam in advance, you keep pushing and pushing and pushing before 1 year has gone by. So the strategy here is, the moment you enroll for the bootcamp, for the training cohort, also register for your exam. And I'm saying it from experience. Those who have gone through our cohort that never registered the exam while they were going through the cohort were those that have not attempted the exam till date, right? So life happens, and before you know, you just keep pushing it and pushing it because you did not set that target from the beginning, that I'm going to write this exam this day. Life will still gonna happen, right? But now you already registered it. All you just do is push it forward, but not like, oh, you haven't even registered at all. And that's why I say it would never happen if you don't register for the exam already. So I just wanted to put that out. So what I think we should do, because of time, is to see if there are questions and that we can address. But I haven't seen any questions up to this point. Yeah, I think Gautier mentioned here to recommend reading both the 6 and 7. I don't know if Remy was able to join. Remy is the one that I was talking about already took the exam, so maybe she wasn't able to join. But yeah, when it comes to tips for the exam, I think that's one thing I would just want us to share here. So I will go to Kemute, Bio, Gautier. So you share your insights in terms of both in the preparation, the training itself, and also in the exam planning. I mean, preparation strategy. So, what would you like to share in those regards? $20 years? What?